kenal yang alumni ya, alumni dari MRK yang join lagi, mungkin ingin refreshing, TK.
Oh, okay.
Because this is the new course for us, ya. So they want to know, ya. Maybe they miss something, ya. Oke, jadi gini, kita akan dalam 3 sesi ke depan, ya, 3 minggu ke depan, TK akan memberikan kuliah, ya. Saya sendiri akan off gitu ya, nanti mungkin Pak Budi yang akan menemani TK ya. Jadi silakan mungkin terutama ini tolong gunakan kesempatan ya untuk bertanya kepada TK terkait dengan ilmu ini ya, karena TK ini memang di sana juga mengajar yang sama tapi dengan judul yang berbeda ya, Buildings Economic ya, TK.
Yes, yes. I teach this in 2019. I'm supposed to teach this again in 2021 this year, but
okay.
because I'm doing another subject, so I do not offer this year.
Oh,
so
okay.
It's special for ITB.
Okay, thank you, TK. Okay, TK, please take your time.
Okay, so good afternoon.
I will leave, TK.
Okay, thanks. Pak Budi is here, right? Pak
Yes,
Budi?
Pak Budi.
Yes, TK.
Okay, very good, very good. So let me just share my screen and then I will talk about myself a little bit, introduce what this subject is all about. PowerPoint, slideshow, share. Okay, can you guys see my PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much for confirming. Let me just get my screen organized. Resize window. Okay, so I understand this is your second lecture of the Construction Economics course at Institut Teknologi Bandung. This is a master's program. My name is Dr. Toong Khuan-Chan. I teach at the University of Melbourne. I teach into the Masters of Construction Management, and this is a subject that I offer once every 2 years as an elective within the construction management program. So this topic actually looks at the economics of the construction industry. I think Pak Abdul described this briefly to you during the introductory lecture last week. So we are using economic principles to examine the construction industry, and we hope to be able to understand how the industry operates and how the firms in the industry operates from an economics perspective. So later on, during weeks 3, week 4, and possibly week 5, depending on how fast we go, we will be using a couple of economic tools to explain how construction industry contributes to the national economy. And that I teach this because it is also part of my research. I'm interested to see how construction firms and construction companies contribute to the national economy. And this will become very useful when you think about how you want to improve your national construction industry. I understand that during the first 5 years of your President Joko Widodo's term, he spent a lot of money on infrastructure development. So you can understand that national development usually follows infrastructure development. So investments in infrastructure improves your quality of life. Now, a little bit about myself. I'm trained as a civil engineer. So I have an S1 degree in civil engineering. I do not have a master's degree. I then went on to do a PhD in structural engineering. So we speak the same language. I'm not trained in construction management, but I've been working in construction management research for close to 20 years now. And my research these days has moved from construction management more into economics. So this subject was developed as a result of my own research into construction economics and some of the work other people do developing construction economics as a another part of economics where they actually firmly ground the research in the construction industry. I have worked in Singapore, Malaysia. I moved to Australia in 2008 and have been at the University of Melbourne for the last 12 years. So I have also visited Pak Abdul and Pak Budi at ITB. So I've spent some time at ITB and I know your lecturers very, very well. I've been to your campus. It's a beautiful campus. And we hope to be able to visit you again in ITB when COVID allows, or COVID ends and we are allowed to travel again. I did my first degree in Malaysia. So obviously I can speak Bahasa, but I have not spoken Bahasa for a very long time. So if you have questions, you can stop me and ask those questions. If you prefer to speak in Bahasa, it's fine. Speak slowly. I can possibly understand 80-90% of your question. So it's okay if you wish to ask me questions in Bahasa, all right? So anytime during the lecture, if you wish to stop me for clarifications, please stop me for clarification. Just unmute yourself and ask questions. Or alternatively, after about maybe 10 or 12 slides, when there is a natural break, I will also stop to give you the opportunity to ask questions. Okay, now let me move on to the next slide. So the content of what we're trying to do today, Pak Budi says, I've got 3 hours. I'm not sure if you can sit and listen for 3 hours, but we'll try to aim for maybe 2.5 hours, okay? I won't, it's very boring to listen to me speak for 3 hours. Now, what I'm going to do is we're going to cover construction output. So a lot of this is to do with construction data for today. We are looking at how construction work is valued. What is construction output? What is construction value add? What are the economic indicators for the construction industry? I have looked at a lot of Indonesian construction data, and then I've also compared them with what is available in Australia. So I will be presenting both sets of data. Sometimes it will be Indonesian data, sometimes it will be Australian data. If you are not sure, please stop me, okay? We will be looking at national accounts, which is how the entire country works out its accounting system. We look at gross domestic product, gross national income, what you call GDP. Then we investigate how important the construction industry is in your national economy. And from what I understand, your construction industry contributes about 10.6% to your GDP, whereas in Australia, it's only about 6-7%, okay? We will also try to explain certain statistical terminology like current prices, chain volume measures, trend, stock and flow series. So a lot of all these statistical data that we get from the Australian Bureau of Statistics or your Badan Pusat Statistik will have to be interpreted correctly. So we will also look at some of the Indonesian sources of data. I will be able to share some technical information from here. We have professional companies that produce market reports, produce reports on specific sectors of the construction industry in Australia and globally. So I may be able to share some of that information with you if we have time. So let's very quickly look at how we define construction around the world. Now, the funny thing about construction, about this slide, is that Australia has a definition of construction that is consistent with the United Nations, but Indonesia uses their own definition, okay? So let's have a look at this. Now, from your perspective, what do you think is construction, or in Bahasa, what you call konstruksi or jasa konstruksi? So we have land developers, property and land developers. You have architects, engineers, mechanical engineers, civil engineer, electrical engineers, quantity surveyors. You also have your material suppliers. You have your product manufacturers. You have equipment hire. You have labor supply firms. But I think what most of you understand of the construction industry is this person in the middle here, which we call contractors and subcontractors. Now, that is the definition of construction industry. But what each country's Department of Statistics define as construction industry is different, okay? So if you look at System of National Accounts, published by the United Nations in 2008, the United Nations and all the countries that choose to follow the United Nations define the construction industry as this: only the contractors and subcontractors that work on project sites. So this is under the System of National Accounts 2008, 2008. And that is the definition adopted by most of the advanced economies. So Australia, UK, US, Singapore, even Malaysia uses this definition of the construction industry. What do you think is the definition of construction in Indonesia? Anyone? How is Indonesia different? Pak Wawan.
Yes, Pak Tuge.
You worked with PTPP before. What is the definition of construction in Indonesia?
I think in Undang-Undang Jasa Konstruksi, Indonesia only regulate as services. So we can found that Indonesian government mentioned that construction is, yes, part of services that delivered by contractor, specialist contractor, something like that.
Yes, but what I see from your Badan Pusat statistic is that you also include.
Oh, that's different because the data Pusat statistic construction is, they call the sector konstruksi. This include all economic aspect that support the construction industry to support jasa konstruksi. So there is a different perspective, I think. In Undang-Undang Jasa Konstruksi only regulate the services that not focus for economic aspect, but Badan Pusat Statistik, they focus in economic aspect. So all services that support the jasa konstruksi will be included in Badan Pusat Statistik.
Yes, but my question is, what does your national accounts actually show? So do they show the value of the construction contract, or does it include the value created by architects and engineers? Does it include the value of labor supply firms, land developers? So that is something that we may have to discuss in this class, okay? So that's another interesting topic for our discussion. Now, let me just explain what happens in Australia. For us, material suppliers are not in construction, they are in manufacturing. Okay, this is in manufacturing. Architects are in services. Product manufacturers are also in manufacturing. Equipment hire is services. Labor supply firm is services. Property and land developer is real estate. Okay, so when we look at construction statistics from Australia, we are very clear, narrowly focused on contractors and subcontractors. So you have to understand the differences. So that is the definition used in Australia. And we do not include architects and engineers or quantity surveyors, no project managers in the construction industry. So when we say that our construction industry contributes about 6 to 7% of our economy, it is the construction companies that contribute 6 to 7%. Okay, the manufacturers that make glass, the manufacturers that make concrete, the ready-mix concrete, all those companies are not part of the construction industry. They're not captured as statistics of the construction industry. So that gives you something to think about, because we are sometimes doing things very differently. Okay, let me just quickly talk about how we measure construction output. Now, construction output, this is what I have from your Konstruksi Indonesia books, where Konstruksi dalam angka 2019, I think is the latest. If you have found the 2020 document, please let me know. So they divide construction into building versus civil, which is very common. You have classified them into 3 categories: building construction, civil construction, and special construction, which is what you call your trade services and all that. You also divide construction into public versus private. So projects that are built for the government are what we call public projects. And let me see, somebody's left. Bimo, Pak Bimo. BPS accounts only contract values for different types. Okay. Now, my question to you is, say you are at the university, right? And if you need to repair the roof of the university building, is that captured in construction? So let's look at an example. You are at a university building, the roof is leaking. Who do you engage to repair the roof? And is that captured in your national accounts? Who wants to give this a shot? Who wants to answer this? You are at the university, the roof of the university has deteriorated. It is now leaking. You call a contractor to repair the roof. Where is this captured?
Hello, Mr. TK.
Yes.
Irfan, Mr. TK, my name.
Yes. How are you?
Okay. I think it's captured at specialist construction.
Yes, it will be a specialist construction that carries out the work, but is that considered new or repair? So how does BPS capture this?
Because the specialist construction included reparation.
Okay. So in your statistics, so are you saying that here in special construction over here, which is building, okay, so in special construction over here, you think that a small proportion over there is repair?
Yes, I think.
Okay. What do the rest of you think? Do you think it's captured as repair? Now, I haven't seen this data captured in BPS, and this is very common for most developing countries. Many developing countries where the repair component is small and unregulated or carried out by smaller contractors, it is very often not captured. All right. And the only way you can see this is using input-output tables, which I will demonstrate in week 3 or week 4. I can't remember now. So repair and maintenance is very often not captured in a developing country. But if you go and have a look at data from Europe or from UK, England, they will have maybe repair and maintenance at 40% of their construction output. So in a country with very old buildings and old infrastructure, repair and maintenance is a large proportion. So that's what R&M. This means repair and maintenance. And that's important for us because we want to be able to differentiate between repair, which basically, if you have a new building and the quality of the building is high, over time, as I gave you in the example, the roof will start to leak. So the quality of the building drops. Repair is defined as bringing the value of the building up to its original value. Okay? But if you add another level, that is considered an extension. So that increases the value of the building. Repair does not increase the value of the building. And this is a very important concept for you to understand because it appears in different parts of the national accounts, which we will look at next week. We've also covered public versus private. So I'll move on to the next slide. Okay, construction output. I only have data until 2017. I think the latest BPS data will have more advanced or more detailed information. Now, if I then look at the total for building, civil, and special, you will realize that the total for Indonesia is, for 2017, is about 958 trillion Indonesian rupiah. If you then look at comparison of growth rates, now if you take those numbers, if you take 958 trillion and divide that over 7 years, you get an average growth rate of 16%. So you would think that your construction industry grows at about 16% every year. But unfortunately, this is not the correct way of measuring. You have to take into account the increases in the price of materials and increases in wages. So you have to take that back to constant 2010 values. So if we then report your construction output based on 2010 values or index them to 2010 values, that basically means that your 2010 construction output remains the same, but your 2017 value will have to be adjusted downwards to $698.9 trillion. So that will then give you a smaller growth rate. So your cumulative annual growth rate, which is your average growth rate over 7 years, is only about 11%. So your construction industry grows at about 11% every year. The price inflation for construction output is about 5%. So each time when we talk about growth or when we are comparing prices across different countries, you have to ensure that they are in constant prices over here and not current prices. Current prices does not take into account of inflation.
Sorry, Pak Tike.
Yes.
May I ask something?
Yeah, sure. One.
It's mean all calculation that have done by BPS is wrong.
I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm saying that you have to check whether the BPS information is current or constant, because BPS have sometimes produce current prices, sometimes they produce constant prices.
Okay, because BPS also calculate the inflation
Yes.
inflation rate for construction industry, I think. So if we compare the system that common in like America or Australia, maybe different.
Different, yes, yes. So we have to make sure that we use the same method of calculation to be able to compare across different countries.
Can I also say something?
Yes, Pak Bimo.
Pak Chan. Okay, there are two sets of data on BPS. One is the actual value, which is in rupiah, billion of rupiah, which
Correct.
is current value. And the other set of data is on the index. So index will calculate based on the inflation and so forth. So there's two set of data. So what confusing reading the BPS report, because sometimes those two data are not comprehensive.
Yes, yes, correct, yeah? correct.
So
yes.
Even for the same year. And secondly, I have to mention that when you talk building construction here, part of the total construction, it's exclude real estate, because real estate is in other sectors that I think you have to account it for the total construction.
What do you mean by real estate?
That's not the sector. That's not the sector, real estate.
Yeah, that's another sector.
No, real estate is housing, building, for housing.
So land development for housing is different, or are you saying that building houses?
BPS categorized that into different sectors. So it's not included in construction if you look into the BPS.
So where is that captured? So Pak Bimo, if you engage a mandor to build your house, where is that captured?
I don't know how they capture that, but the report says that the total value generated from construction, I don't think they include the real estate, because the real estate is presented in separate section.
Separate section, yes, correct, correct. Look, I think this is a good opportunity for students at ITB and for us to sit down and talk about how BPS is collecting data. And I can share with you how the United Nations and most developed economies process the data. So we can then see how to understand what Indonesia is doing. Okay, I think Pak Wawan is also looking at construction industry data. So this will be a huge challenge looking at data. Now, another thing I wanted to point out is if in 2017, we are indexing to 2010. So we basically call the 2010 data the constant data, right? So this and this is the same. By the time it comes to 2022, BPS may refer to 2015 data. So they may make this 100. So they will very often change their index and index to another year. So that confuses us even more because your previous set of publications and your newer set of publications uses a different constant value. Okay? And I will explain how this changes over time. Or clarifications. Okay, now it's all very important to look at the split between civil, building, and construction. This is in Indonesia, right? So you have your civil construction as about 50%, which is approximately correct because you are investing a lot into infrastructure development. You are building highways, you are building ports, you are building bridges, you are developing moving to all the other parts of Indonesia. So it is natural building construction. Later on, when I show you what happens in Australia, the other part I want to talk about is special construction. So special construction.
I'm losing the sound. I cannot hear you.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Let me just check my microphone again. Testing. This is working now?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So I've changed my microphone. Now, what I'm trying to say is that when Pak Bimo spoke about residential construction, we're not sure if there is an informal sector in Indonesia where some of the construction work carried out is not captured by BPS. So this is something you have to think about. In most advanced economies, all construction work above a certain value is captured. All right. So you have to think back about your own country and check if nearly all your construction work is captured. And that basically means that every contractor that is working in the construction industry must be obligated to report all construction contracts. So that is the issue. You have all contractors must report, all the small construction companies must report their construction contracts. Because if they don't report, then you will not be able to capture. Now, this is Australia. So usually I will start by comparing Australia versus Indonesia. So this is for Australian construction data. Now, I have to explain a few things. If you look at this, the year, we do not use calendar year, we use financial year. So one financial year, or rather our financial year starts from July to June. So we do not have data for year 2020. We have data for July 2019 until 30th June 2020. So all our data comes in a financial year period. Okay, so all the data are in 2000, 2001. This will be 2001, 2002, 2002, 2003. The split of private versus public, this is for building work done. And if you look at building work, most of the building work in Australia is by the private sector. Okay? Private sector building is this line. Public sector building is very small. Nearly all the buildings in Australia is built privately. So private houses, private apartments, commercial shopping centers, offices, hotels, shopping mall, all those buildings are built using private money. What does the government build? The government builds hospitals, government builds schools, police station, prisons. What else do they build? Libraries, I think those are the few buildings that the government built. Anyone wants to guess what happened over here? Why is there a jump in 2009, 2010, and 2010, 2011? What do you think is happening here? And a corresponding decline over here. So this one fell down, this one went up. What do you think happened here?
Crisis, I think.
Global financial crisis. So 2008, 2009 is when the global financial crisis occurred. Because of the global financial crisis, the government knew that private sector investments will drop. All right. So this is very clear. The moment an economic crisis occurs, investments will drop, output will drop, and we expect the government to keep employment in construction industry. So they have to very quickly invest in buildings over here. So they built schools. This is one area of construction where everybody agrees. Okay? Whether you are supporting the government or you support the opposition, every time you choose to build schools, everyone says yes. So that was a very clear indication of what happened during the global financial crisis. Government invested heavily in building schools. If you look at engineering work, so this is civil engineering work. This is again very clear that who do you think invests more in engineering or infrastructure? This will be government, right? So the government, public sector is here in infrastructure. Hey, sorry, wrong one. Wrong line. Public sector is less. It is, again, private that is high, which is very interesting in Australia, because a lot of the infrastructure put in Australia is to support mining. All right? Don't forget that Australia is, even though the public sector funding is high, so, okay, if you looked at before 2002, 2003, this is public. But after that, private sector investments came on. So that is basically because of our oil and gas, our coal, mining, electricity generation, transmission and distribution. We went on a very large PPP, privatization type of development, where most of the investments into infrastructure was pushed to the private sector. We can have a discussion about how Indonesia is doing this, okay? So after 2002, it was the private sector that was investing in a lot of engineering and infrastructure works. So if you then look at total work done, this is the total of both building and engineering. You can see that it's, again, driven primarily by the private sector. There's a decline in construction 2009-2010. That was, I've explained this earlier, this was the global financial crisis, and the government pushed that up when private sector investments came down. So the total amount of work is now about 82% private. So if you look at the latest year, where total work done was $200 billion, private is 82%, public is only 18%. And I think your situation in Indonesia is the other way around. Your government spends more than your private sector in the construction industry. This is just the same information again. This is now looking at total building, total engineering. So these are actually the exact breakdown of the figures. We don't need to go through that. Now, what I'm going to show you now is additional economic indicators from the construction sector in Australia. We can look at employment, we can look at wages and salaries, sales or revenue, total income, total expenses, operating profit before tax. EBITDA is a financial term, earning before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization. It's an acronym, EBITDA, earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization. So that is an indicator of how well the companies are run. And we have industry value add. So these are current values, current prices. That means it's not adjusted for inflation. And we can see the three different sectors. So that's for building construction, that's for civil engineering, that's for services, and a comparison of 2006, 2007 with 2014, 2015. In terms of number of workers, we have about 1 million workers in the construction industry. It has grown very slightly, okay? Our population doesn't grow very much. Therefore, the number of workers in the construction industry also does not grow very much. So over a period of, 8 years, the growth is just a very small percentage. But in terms of wages and salaries, you can see that there's a huge jump in wages and salaries. So that's in million Australian dollars. 34 million went up to $59 million. But just don't forget that these are current prices, okay? So they have not taken into account inflation. Where do you think are the largest jumps in wages and salaries? Construction services has a large jump. Heavy civil engineering has also got a, so in relative terms, so if you actually look at percentage increase, all the percentage increases are quite similar. They all have quite large jumps. So even though we don't have lots of new workers coming in, their wages have increased significantly. Revenues have also gone up, total expenses. Now, what is more interesting is possibly the next slide, where we look at employers' contribution, workers' compensation. Okay, so these are all similar types of information, just extension of the previous table, which is broken down into building, civil, and construction services again. These are the wages, which you've seen earlier. Superannuation is what we call the contribution to the pension funds. All workers in Australia contribute to a pension fund. The employer has to contribute a certain amount. The employee contributes a certain amount. So that's the contribution to pension. We have payroll tax. So that's a tax that the employer needs to pay on top of salaries. So we have lots of information on the construction industry. So there's lots of data being collected. So if you then look at just wages alone, it is not just the wages that are paid out. You have to add on employer contribution. You have to add on workers' compensation premium. So this is like an insurance policy. There could be additional tax, fringe benefit tax, and then there is payroll tax. So at the end of the day, the employer has to pay. So instead of only $59 billion, when you add in all the other additional contributions, the wages for the employers are a very significant proportion of the construction cost. Okay, so we are a very high labor cost country. So that, I think, is in one sentence, what I'm trying to say is that it's very expensive for labor in Australia.
Pak Tike.
Yes.
Yeah. Pak Tike, as
yes.
you mentioned before that in Australia there are exclude engineering services, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what the different building construction, heavy and engineering construction, and construction services?
We don't use the term construction services. We just use the term construction. So construction is defined as all...
Number 32 in your
Sorry?
In your slide. The total construction is sum of building construction, heavy and civil engineering construction, and construction services.
Construction services.
Yes.
No. These are what we call the specialist services, like plumbing, electrician, carpentry. So that's not professional services. These are what we call specialist subcontractor.
Oh, I see. Okay, Pak Tiki.
Okay. Stop me anytime if you have questions, okay? Was I here? We've done this, okay? So the next slide is profit margin. Okay, so this is when it gets really exciting. Where you look at building construction, profit margin is about 6-7%. You look at civil engineering, 4-5%. Construction services is much higher. So why do you think construction services have such a high profit margin? This is because they use a lot of skilled workers, right? So this is where a lot of the construction skilled workers are located. They are the skilled plumbers, skilled carpenters, skilled electricians, and all the specialist subcontracting work is here. So they then have a very high labor cost and then seem to have a higher profit margin. Now, sales and service wages, these are their wages per employee. These are wages per employee. These are wages per employee as well. So the workers in the civil engineering sector seem to make a bit more money than the other workers in the building sector. Value add is always higher in civil because they use a lot more machines. Okay, so if you think about one worker working with equipment and machinery can build roads, whereas if you have a worker, a carpenter, they don't seem to be able to increase their productivity by using too many tools. So it is easier to improve productivity in civil than in building, right? And the lowest industry value add is in construction services because that is still a very labor intensive sector. Gross fixed capital formation. I think I'll leave gross fixed capital formation discussion until we come to the input-output tables. But this is capital expenditure. You will see that in the civil engineering sector, they spend quite a lot on capital expenditure, then followed by construction services over here. Now, this is a very important point about the Australian construction industry. In the building sector, about 70% of the companies made a profit. About 30% of the companies made a loss. Okay, so if there are building contractors, only 70% make money. 30% actually lose money. In civil engineering, it's very much the same. 70% make money, 30% lose money. In construction services, it's slightly different, 85 to 15. And for the total industry, it's 80%, about 20%. So it could be very different in Indonesia. I think maybe some of you have told me that in Indonesia, it's possible to make more profits. But in Australia, this is very common that the construction companies do not make much profits. Okay, only 70% of them make a profit. Many of them lose money.
Pak Tiki.
Yes.
I have one more question, Pak Tiki. Sorry, Pak Tiki. too many questions.
No. Good. This is very good. Ask questions.
My question is how the accounting system in Australia. Does Australia use accrual or cash basis?
Accrual.
Accrual. Okay.
Accrual. Yes. Yeah.
Because why you think that Indonesian construction mostly make a profit?
Mm-hmm.
Because there we use accrual. So the sales we accrue before happen. So you get my point, Pak Tiki?
So even before they finish the contract, they book a profit.
Yes.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
So sometimes when the project finish, what we put in book, this is different.
It's different.
Yes, this is different. And
yes.
mostly is the project is due by government company, so they have like lip service in this case, because if director not make money, the ministry will change the director. You get my point, Pak Tiki?
I get your point. Yes, because it is under the Menteri BUMN.
Yeah, this is different with the private sector. Private sector mostly, if they make money, they say they lose money.
They lose money.
Because if they say they make money, they have to pay tax, they have to pay THR, something like that.
Correct. No, but in Australia, you cannot hide. Everything is transparent. So it is very difficult to we can talk about this later on, because it is a huge problem. And with a lot of companies going bankrupt, there is a new problem where contractors choose to go bankrupt instead of paying their suppliers. So they use this as a trick to not pay suppliers, which becomes a very dangerous situation. Okay. Now, we also collect data on building approvals. So it is very easy for us to predict what is the short-term demand for construction, because the architects, builders, planners always report to the Australian government on number of buildings approved, number of buildings commenced. So we have approval, we have commencement, we have completions. So it's, you know, that a construction project takes maybe 2 or 3 years. So if you have buildings approval, you know that over the next 1 or 2 years, these buildings have to be built. So you can predict that there will be construction or building activity over time. If you look very closely at this, this figure here is private and public is not shown, but you can see that the public number is very small because the total is very close to the private, okay? So most of the buildings, or these are dwellings which are houses, are funded by the private sector. Dwellings excluding houses, so if it is not a house, okay, you have to, again, I have to explain what is a house in Australia. A house in Australia is defined as a stand-alone house. So if you have a piece of land and you build one house, this is called a house. Okay? If you have a piece of land and you build two, number one, number two, these are called units or dual occupancies. So for us, a house is this one, all right? So houses are the most common form of housing in Australia. We also have apartments, high-rise apartments, towers, and all that. So you can see that it's quite clear that most of us live in houses. Back in so the construction of or approval of new buildings in 2011, we approved 91,000 and 58,000 apartments. But you can also see that the number of apartments have increased considerably. Can you see this? This is about 60% of that, but in the later years, these are now very close numbers. So what I can tell you is that we have almost run out of land and we are building more densely in the capital cities. I think Pak Wawan has been to Melbourne when he did his studies over here. If he comes back today, he will not be able to recognize Melbourne because we have lots and lots of tall buildings in the city now. So the more recent construction is all apartment buildings in the city. Where are we building? We have breakdowns according to the states. So these are dwelling units approved, which means they have put in the paperwork, they have applied to the town council to build those houses. You can see that most of the approvals are in New South Wales and Victoria. These are our two largest states in Australia. New South Wales is where Sydney is. Sydney is the capital of New South Wales, and Melbourne is the capital of Victoria. So these are the two major cities in Australia. There's also Brisbane in Queensland that is also building lots of buildings. And then South Australia, Western Australia, Tasmania, Northern Territories, and ACT. So that is the number of units approved per year. So we built, or we have approval for about 237,000 dwelling units per year. I think in Indonesia, you were aiming for 1 million houses recently, or 1 million units of dwelling. So I'm not sure how successful that has been carried out over time. Dwelling units, so if houses, it's clearly private sector, okay? So if you look at this, it's private sector. The government only provides very small numbers of public housing. So these are public housing. It's generally for the underprivileged or the very, very poor that would have to go for public housing. So most of the housing is here. It's all private sector housing. Alterations and additions. So that is when you want to extend your house. So those are the approvals for alterations and additions, conversions. Non-residential buildings could be some funny type of building. We don't need to talk about that. Now, so what you see over here are mostly new buildings, okay? The alterations and additions are very, very small numbers. So it's only, what, about 1 or 2% are additions to existing buildings. The value of approval, so value of building approved. So we can even estimate what is the value of new construction that's coming on in the next year or two. So there are new residential buildings valued at about 66 billion Australian dollars, and non-residential buildings. So you can estimate how much your total construction demand is for certain periods of time. This is commenced. So after approval, we also track the value of work that actually starts during the year. So we have a system of coding it. 8752 is a value of work commenced. So in 2015, 2016, that is the value of work commenced during that financial year. So that's $73 billion of residential work. That's $34 billion of non-residential work. Okay, so these are all buildings. So residential will be houses and apartments. Non-residential will be your schools, hospitals, prisons, police station, community buildings, and all that. Shopping malls. Okay, that's a good time to take a break before I go on to national accounts. Any questions from students or from other participants on the data from Australian construction industry? Any questions? Any other questions? Pak Budi, everything okay?
Yes, sir. Is it possible to go back to the slide that presents the value add, construction value add? Is it a kind of profit?
This one, industry added value.
Yes, and before, the slide before, I think you have the last column for...
Yes, this one is industry value add per person. Yeah, this is an interesting one. Yes, but I will wait until the next couple of slides before I explain industry value add. Remember okay. Last year I gave the example of a baker and bread.
Yes.
Yes. We will talk about value add in a little while.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Any other questions? What do you call value add in bahasa? Nilai tambah?
Yes, nilai tambah.
Nilai tambah. Okay, so we will be talking about nilai tambah in a little while. Any other questions? Okay, I'll continue. So this little section here is on national accounts, and I think in Bahasa it's called Neraca Nasional. It is how we actually work out the wealth of a country. So it's just like how much wages you earn in a year. This is how this is an accounting system for the entire country. And the information is very useful for economic analysis and for the formulation of economic policy. It also allows us to compare across different nations, provided that we all use the same accounting system. All right. So this is where the choice of an accounting system, a choice of how you define your construction industry becomes very important. We will be looking at 3 different sectors of the economy. And we will then be able to understand the differences between investment, consumption, between the 3 sectors of the economy. So if you look at an economy, we normally divide the economy into 3 sectors. There is the government, which you call pemerintah. Then you have households, where it's you and I. We all live at home, we earn a wage or a salary, and we also spend money on consumables and investments. And you have a third entity, which we call companies, firms, or corporate entities. And in Indonesia, I think you use the term badan usaha. So these are the three sectors of economies. And what is important is for us to understand how these three sectors interact and how these three sectors generate wealth. Okay, so the idea of national accounts first came about in England because they wanted, or rather the king wanted to know how much wealth or how much gold he has to go to war. You can imagine that in the Middle Ages and 17th century, England was always trying to fight wars with France and with all the other European powers, right? So it's an estimate of how much money the king has to go to war. In the 18th century, then it became looking more focused towards looking at natural resources, so agriculture and mining. And at that time, there was no such thing as manufacturing. It was all to do with agriculture, how many cows they have in England and how they produce milk, how much gold and iron they can extract from the mining sector. One of the earliest discussions about economics and wealth and all that was in Adam Smith's book, Wealth of Nations. So if you have an opportunity, get hold of this book. It's quite an interesting read because back then, even in 1776, there were ideas about how to use manufacturing to improve national wealth. So in 1930s, a national accounting system, a rough national accounting system was created. And in 1941, Leontief published his classic input-output study, The Structure of the American Economy. And that's how we started looking at an accounting system to capture the total economic output in a particular country, okay? In 1953, this is what we call System of National Accounts, was published by the United Nations. And that is because the United Nations realized that it's very hard to compare across countries if we do not use the same system for national accounts. So the United Nations published all these methods of collecting economic data to allow different countries to compare their performance with other countries. The latest one, I think, is SNA 2008. So if you type in System of National Accounts 2008, you should be able to get a copy from the United Nations Statistics Department. And if I'm not mistaken, Indonesia adopted that in 2015. So Indonesia was using an earlier version of the SNA, which was 1993. And they updated that to the 2008 edition in 2015. For Australia, we first started looking at balance sheets for New South Wales because New South Wales was the largest settlement back then. In 1948, we started producing national balance sheets. And if you get on to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, which is our equivalent Badan Pusat Statistik, we have our Australian national accounts published every year. We have a special system of looking for information on the statistics website. You just need to remember a 4-digit code, 5206, automatically gives you national accounts. So it's quite easy for us to look for all that information. Okay, there are 3 approaches to measure GDP. And GDP is, in English, is gross domestic product. In Bahasa, it's product domestic bruto. We can use the income approach, the expenditure approach, or the production approach. First of all, let me just quickly talk about the income approach. This is quite easy for you to understand. If you look at yourself, how much income do you make in a year? So that's quite straightforward, right? Your salary, so compensation of employees, which is your income for the year. For for a country, then all they have to do is add up all the income for all the workers in the country. So that sounds quite logical. Then you add up all the profits. So these are gross operating surplus, meaning to say that it's the profits of all the companies that is operating within your country. All right, so that is the plus wages, plus profit, plus tax. So the government collects taxes. So that is taxes for production, which you call pajak. Things that you buy from overseas imports, okay, and minus subsidies. Remember that subsidies is what the government pays either to you as an individual or to a company as subsidies for production. So that's the income approach. So GDP is wages, profits, taxes collected by government, imports. I think this one needs to have minus exports or some sort of other, all right? So we will finalize the formulas later on, and subsidies. Now, there is another approach to calculate GDP, and that's the expenditure approach. If you think about this, in accounting, you have your money coming in and your money going out. So this is the same. It is very similar to accounting for a person or for a company. This is accounting for the country. So you can also look at this as from the expenditure approach, where GDP is now the total sum of private consumption, investment or expenditure, government consumption, exports, minus imports. Now, I just need to confirm with you guys whether you understand the difference between consumption and investment. Consumption is where the money you spend is consumed. So if you buy food, you buy clothes, and you pay for your bus ticket or your airline ticket, or you pay for your Gojek ride, those are all what we call private consumption expenditure. You spend that money and it's gone. Investment, on the other hand, is when you buy shares in a company or if you buy a house. Okay? So those are what we call investment expenditures because the value remains. Government consumption, because government is also part of the economy. What the government spends in consumption is in education. They pay salaries of teachers. There's healthcare, there's police, there is army in defense. So all those things are what you call government consumption expenditure. The government also invests, okay? Don't forget that the government also invests in infrastructure. Like, so if you think of building the MRT in Jakarta or your Kereta Cepat, Jakarta Bandung, those are investment expenditures by the government of Indonesia. Then you have your value of exports. So the more the country exports, the more your GDP increases, but you have to deduct the value of imports. Okay, production approach is this is the third approach, which is some value of outputs minus cost of inputs plus taxes plus subsidies. It's not so easy to work out GDP from a production approach. So most of this subject, we will be looking more from the just using one of the approaches, right? So now let's start to define a few other important points. Final goods and services are defined as goods and services produced for final use by the consumer. Now, whereas intermediate goods are goods that are used for processing of other goods or goods that are incorporated into other products. So for example, if you buy a loaf of bread from the supermarket, that loaf of bread is called a final good. Okay? Because that loaf of bread is sold to the final customer. You go home, you eat the bread. So that is final good because it is consumed by the customer. Now, if you think about a baker, all right? The baker goes to the warehouse and buys flour. Now, if a baker buys flour, the baker doesn't eat the flour. The baker uses the flour to make bread. So that becomes an intermediate good. So flour, F-L-O-U-R, what do you call that in Bahasa? Tepung.
Yes, tepung.
Tepung, yes, Pak Budi, tepung. Yeah. So tepung is an intermediate good if it is purchased by a baker, because the baker will then process the flour into bread. So bread is final. All right. Bread is a final good. Intermediate is flour. And value add is the difference between the value of goods as they leave a stage of production to another stage of production. So if the baker has bought flour and converted it into bread, we say that the baker has added value. Okay? So that is what we call value added, or in Bahasa Indonesia is nilai tambah. If you add all the value add produced in your country, that becomes GDP. So what you're trying to capture with GDP is all the value add for every person, every company, plus the government. Well, sometimes we argue that the government doesn't add any value, okay, which is very strange. We think that the government only consumes, they don't add value. It's a sensitive topic for the whole country, and that becomes GDP. Now, gross value add is defined as the value of output at basic prices minus the value of intermediate consumption at purchases price. So let's define basic price and purchases price. The basic price is the amount received by the producer from the purchaser for a unit of good or services produced as output minus any tax payable and plus any subsidy receivable. Just think about this. It's the amount received by the producer from the purchaser. So if person A is selling flour to the baker, okay? So if person A is selling flour to the baker, there will be some taxes added on that the baker has to pay. There will be transportation added on. Transport that the baker has to pay. So the baker actually has to pay more than the price of flour. Baker has to pay tax. Baker has to pay some transport. So what the baker pays is purchaser price. Purchaser price is what the baker pays. Basic price is what A receives. Okay? So the difference is usually tax, transport, and a few other things. Does that make sense?
How about
basic? Yes.
How about profit, Mr. TK? Profit for A.
Profit for A is inside basic price.
Oh, I see. Not.
Yeah. Profit is hidden inside here. It is the amount. Okay.
Okay. It means
so,
purchase price is including profit for A.
Including profit for A, yes. It is the actual rupiah amount. So it could be, how much is flour per kilo? 20,000. Okay, let's say it's 20.000 per kilo. All right, so that is the amount given to A. But the baker may have to pay tax. What is your tax now? I don't know what your tax is. Tax could be 10%, extra tax could be 10%. They may have to pay transportation if the baker is far away from Jakarta, right? So whatever A receives, it's just 20,000 rupiah. It will include his cost. It will include his profit. Okay, this is possibly a good time for me to explain nilai tambah. So let me just stop sharing this and run something else, value add. Share screen. Okay, can you guys see this? An example for bread. Okay, I will demonstrate value add this way. Let's assume that our friend Wawan is a baker. He wants to make bread. So I checked at your Indomaret. A loaf of bread, what you call roti tawar, is 15,000 rupiah. Okay, let's assume that Wawan pays 2,000 rupiah for the bread. So he wakes up at 3 o'clock this morning. He goes to the forest, collects firewood. He mixes the flour with water and bakes the bread. How much profit does he make? 13,000, correct? So because Pak Wawan woke up this morning and decided to work to make a loaf of bread, he created value. So the original value of the flour is 2,000 rupiah. But because he produced work, he actually did some work and converted it to bread. He has made a profit of 13,000 rupiah. So what is the value added here? What do you think is the value add? How much value has Pak Wawan created?
13,000.
Sorry?
13,000.
13,000. Okay? Are we all agreed? Pak Wawan created 13,000 rupiah of value at day one. Okay. Tomorrow, Pak Wawan, this is now day 2, okay? Day 2. Day 2, Pak Wawan says that instead of waking up very early to collect wood, he says that I will hire somebody else to collect wood. All right? So he doesn't want to wake up at 4 a.m. to collect wood. He engages somebody else. So he pays another person 1,000 rupiah to collect wood. So the bread is still 15,000. The flour is still 2,000. Firewood is still free, but he now has to pay wages. Okay, he now has to pay wages. How much profit would Pak Wawan make now? $12,000, correct? Because he now has to spend 2,000 on flour, 1,000 on wages. This one is to collect firewood. Can you all see this? Okay, what is value add now? In this example, what do you think is value add?
$12,000, Pak.
Berapa?
12.
12.
Ya, 12.
Okay, if you argue that it's 12, what about wages? Because there is one person who decided to work that day, and this person made 1,000 rupiah. If that person did not wake up, he would have made no money. But because that person woke up, that person is now making 1,000 rupiah. See, in day one, this fellow made nothing. The fellow was sleeping. Day two, this person woke up and decided to work. So what is value add?
I think still 30,000.
13.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because
it's 13.
Yeah. The 1,000 is value add for person that collect firewood.
Yes, person that collect firewood added 1,000 rupiah of value. Okay, so the value add is still 13,000. Can you all see this? Okay, day 3. What are we going to do today? We don't want to collect firewood. You use electricity. Okay, now it's modern method of baking, electricity. So you don't hire the worker now 0. Bread is still 15,000. Flour is still the same. Firewood is 0. Electricity is a bit more expensive now. 2,000. Okay, electricity is 2,000. What is profit?
11.
What is value add?
60.
What is value add?
As electricity create a value add?
Let's assume electricity does not create value add.
Oh.
Let's assume that electricity is completely consumed.
11.
11. Okay, so the value add is now 11. So if you are consuming electricity and electricity doesn't create any value add, your value add is 11. So do you understand now how value add works in this very, very simple example? So just because you pay someone to collect firewood, you are creating value add. Now, Pak Wawan is even more lazy today. Okay. He now hires somebody else to work. This one is not to collect firewood, but to bake bread. He is now the boss. He doesn't want to bake bread anymore. So instead of paying one worker, he pays 3 workers. He uses this, no firewood. $2,000 flour, no firewood. Okay, what is the profit now? So Pak Wawan now needs to wake up. He only needs to wake up at 8 a.m. He doesn't have to wake up early to make the bread. He doesn't collect firewood. He just pays for electricity. He pays for workers. What is his profit?
10.
Electricity?
10,000. Electricity. 10,000.
No, less. Now is 10,000. No.
Oh, no.
9.
No, 8,000.
8,000.
8,000. Profit is reducing. Yes, because he now sleeps until 8 o'clock. Pak Wawan is getting lazy. Okay, value add.
Value added 13. 13.
And
11.
11,000.
Oh yes.
Yes, yes, yes. It's this one
Yes.
plus
And
profit.
Profit.
Yes, it's always wages and profit. Okay, it is always wages and profit. So value add is always wages and profit. Okay, let's have another example. So let me just change to a building example. Okay, those of you who wish to come and visit me, this is our building at the university. My office is somewhere here. Lantai 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Lantai 5. Lantai 4 lah. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, my office is somewhere here. Let's assume that the building is actually only, the real value is 140 million. Okay, but let's make life easy. Let's make it $100 million. Million Australian dollars. What do you think is the breakdown of material, labor? Let's put this as electricity, easier to count. Fuel and profit. Contract sum is 100 million. What do you think is the breakdown? Materials, how many million?
40.
Berapa?
40.
40%. 40 from 100.
Okay, labor?
50, I think.
50? 45?
No. 15.
Ah, no. Our labor is very expensive, my friend.
Oh.
Not the same in Indonesia.
It's not the same here. Labor here. Let's put this at 45. Let's put this at 40. Okay, labor is 40. So now I have berapa lagi? 45. Electricity 4, 5, 6. Okay, does that add up to 100?
Yes.
Okay, that adds up to 100. What do you think is the value add for this building? Assuming no subcontractor, okay? We buy materials, we hire workers, we pay electricity, we pay fuel, and we make 6% profit. What is value add?
46.
46. Okay, we have one answer, 46. How many other answers do you have?
Maybe I answer it, Prof.
Pak Joko, I cannot hear you.
How are you? Hello?
Hello, Pak Joko.
I want to answer. Hello?
Yes.
My answer is 140.
140. How do you get 140, Pak Joko?
40 and 6.
40 and 6. Yes, it is correct. 40 and 6. So you basically add your labor plus your
profit is 100.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so that is how we work out value add. It is profit for the company and labor for the workers. So this is how it is carried out. Now, so any other questions? Any questions about this for now? Because I now want to show you BPS. Any questions? Okay, so you just remember, when the contract sum is 100 million, your value add is less, okay? Normally, if you say that in Indonesia, okay, what do you think the Indonesian values are? So let's change this to 100 in Indonesia. So this is in Australia. What do you think is the same building in Indonesia? What will be the materials cost? Can someone help me here? Many of you are working in the construction industry.
I think so.
Profit 10.
Profit 10, okay.
Material maybe 50.
Labor?
Labor 30. I'm not sure.
Never mind. Let's try. 50, 30, 10, 90 already. So 5. Let's just put 5. Okay. So your value add will be
50. 60. Oh yeah, 50. Oh, 40.
40, yes, 40, right? 30 plus 10, 40. Value add is 40. So you can see that because in Australia, our labor cost is very high. Our value add is also higher. Right, let me stop sharing this and share something else.
Pardon me, Mr. TK, I want to ask you about if value added for the construction, there is a variable from land acquisition. From the land is more cheaper, but when it builds some commercial building, what about it?
Yes, that is a very good question. In Australia, that is captured under real estate. So the added value is in real estate. It is not in construction. Because construction is defined as the total output. So the output is here. You see, because if there's a company that is, this is a contract sum. So that's what is contracted. That is the value that is shown in the construction contract. So if that is only 100 million, then the value add is how much the company creates by delivering the construction. Whereas if you develop a piece of land, the increase in the value of land is captured under real estate. And the government, because the government will tax.
Okay.
Correct? When you change land use. So all that is captured under real estate. It should not be in construction.
Oh, I see. Thank you.
But then you also have a problem. What if the company is the same company? So there is a company that does construction and the same company does real estate. So the accounting becomes quite difficult. Okay? So for example, like PP is, there is PP construction and there's PP property.
Property,
So,
yes.
yes, so PP property is the one that captures the value of the development, but it is the construction company that gets the value add. So BPS must make sure that the value add is attributed to the correct division within your national accounts.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, this is a good problem. This is a very interesting problem. Okay, so let me just share another screen. Oops, sorry. Wait, I haven't started another screen. Konstruksi. Okay, I'm going to share this document, which is that it's one of your BPS document, Konstruksi dalam angka. So now that you understand the difference between construction output and value add, let us just very quickly have a look at some of the figures over here. Okay, so this is table 4, summary of construction statistics. Can you see this? Is this big enough? Summary of construction statistics 2017 and 2018. Okay. Value of construction completed is this. What unit are they using? This is 1271 trillion, right? That is the value of construction completed. Now, so my question is, what is this? What is nilai output? If your value of construction is 1.271 and your nilai tambah or value add looks very high. Correct? So this is something that we have to investigate, especially Pak Wawan, if you are interested to have a look at this, because it's compensation and wages is 209. Okay, that's 209, but your value add looks very high. So this is a big question mark over here. I'm not sure how BPS collects your data, but it just doesn't look right, because if your compensation and wages is only 205, it's very hard to get up to that value 979. And then how do you then compare value add for construction as a percentage of GDP? So those are some of the questions that I have, which we can investigate later on.
It means the profit is very high, I think.
Do you think the profit is very high?
Yes.
Wow, I think I should start a construction company in Indonesia.
Because as you mentioned before, that value add is sum of wages and profit for...
Yes. Yeah, but do you think it's correct? Because this one compared to this is also very high. More than half. This one divided by that is greater than 50%. Right? Because wages is only 205. That means profit is what? 979 minus 205 is 770 profit. No, that's too high. So I think there's something wrong with your BPS data, or with our understanding of BPS data. We can have a look at that later on. You have lots of very useful information in your BPS. You have your workers, you have your compensation, you have your materials used, you have your fuel, other expenses, value of construction work completed, value of construction completed. So this is the value of construction completed in the whole of Indonesia, 1271. And well, have a look at this document, all right? This document is very interesting, that you have a lot of information on your construction industry. All right, let me go back to my PowerPoint presentation, and I'll show you what we have in Australia. National accounts, slideshow. Okay, so this is the Australian, let me just check. If you wish to look at the Australian national accounts, you just go to abs.gov.au. You search for 5206. You can download our Australian national accounts. If you wish to get your national accounts for Indonesia, you go to Badan Pusat Statistik Indonesia at bps.go.id, download Statistik Indonesia 2019. That's 782 pages. Now, I'm looking at the Australian ones, and you can actually see the expenditure on GDP, income from GDP, and all those data from the Australian tables. What I want to show you is this. Before COVID, right? Before COVID, Australia has something like close to 30 years of continuous growth. We have not had a recession for nearly 30 years before 2020. So a recession is defined as 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth. So it must be negative for at least 6 months before it is considered a recession. So in the global financial crisis of 2008, we suffered one quarter of negative. So this is global financial crisis, GFC. And then in 2010 or 2011, we suffered another quarter of negative growth. And after that, it was generally positive growth. Now, the problem came in 2020, where we had, this is second quarter, I think, Q2, this is Q3, and then Q4, we recovered, okay? So we did go into recession in 2020. I'm not sure how it is in Indonesia. So if you guys know what's happening in Indonesia, please let me know. On the next slide, this is our national accounts, 5206. This is using expenditure approach, where it's consumption, gross fixed capital formation, inventory increases, and export increases. So this is consumption. You have government consumption, you have household consumption, then you have gross fixed capital formation. Gross fixed capital formation is basically investments, okay? This is investments in capital goods. So investments in capital goods basically include machinery that you purchase in manufacturing, houses, buildings. So what we're trying to say is that most of the output by the construction industry goes towards investment, all right? You cannot consume a house. You cannot consume a hotel. You cannot consume a hospital. These are always considered as investments, and it would be captured as gross fixed capital formation. That's the reason why we say that the construction industry contributes quite a significant amount to your national economy. And that's basically because we generate all the investments. So gross fixed capital formation, dwellings, these are new houses. Non-dwelling construction, these are buildings and civil engineering construction. And there's machinery and equipment that is used in the manufacturing, mining, and usually agricultural sectors. On the next slide is it's a continuation of the same table. This is still table 9. And if you then add up gross domestic product, this is quarterly, right? This is Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4. If you add all that up, you will have the GDP for Australia for that period of time. So that is usually for a year. Now, we then compare that with the value add for the entire industry. So this is industry value add. Don't confuse this with industry output. Remember earlier on we were talking about industry output. This is not industry output. This is industry value add or nilai tambah. So the construction industry value add is that value. Okay, so if you sum all that up of about $33 billion per quarter, that would come up to be about $130 billion a year. So the value add for the construction industry is about $130 billion a year. So that's how we work out what is the percentage of contribution to your national economy. Now, if I then look at Indonesian value, so this is from BPS, your GDP at current market prices by industry. This is for 2014 to 2018. I think your 2018 is still an estimated value. Your GDP for the country is this. This is for Indonesia. And this is for Konstruksi. Okay, so if you take that value divided by that value, you should be able to get your percentage of contribution of construction to your national economy. But this is supposed to be value add. I'm not sure how that value comes about, right? So it looks suspiciously high. What do you guys think? After having looked at your BPS data, does this look correct? What do you think? We can talk about this later, okay? Let me go back to the Australian one. So this is again the Australian one. This is table 18, looking at income from GDP. So it's another approach to calculating GDP. This is the income approach. If you look at compensation of employees, you then look at operating surplus, which is profits from companies, and then you take your taxes minus subsidies. You can also work out GDP from your income approach. So this is another way of calculating GDP. If I were to look at your Indonesia one again, this is GDP by expenditure at current market prices. It's quite small over here, so it's quite difficult to see, but I'll leave you to try that out on your own, okay? Now, GDP per capita. This is quite important because GDP on its own just says how much value the whole country is generating, but it's more important to look at GDP per capita because then it affects each individual within the economy. If you then look at GDP in total, so this is just GDP and this is GDP per capita. So if you take your national GDP divided by the number of citizens you have in your country, you end up with a GDP per capita of 55,986,000 rupiah. So you always check that you get your units correct because that's 55,986,000 rupiah. Okay, and that's how you compare GDP per capita across different countries. You have 265 million people in Indonesia. Are there any questions at this stage? Okay, this is Australia. Now, Australian construction GDP has fluctuated between 7% or 6%. So this is the percentage of GDP for construction in Australia. This is construction. and it has fluctuated, say, maybe between 5.5 and 0.85. All right. So that's the band for construction in Australia. So as a developed country, you can see that our construction GDP percentage has come down, but the recent investments over time, especially in the mining sector, has taken our percentage of GDP up to about 8.5%. All right, over the last 10 years, I think. So I think this subject gives us an opportunity to examine what's happening in the entire country and explain why the construction industry is performing the way it is. If you look at the Indonesian one again, you can also see that it has gone up from 9.86% in 2014 to about 10.53% in 2018. And this is clearly the result of extra investments into infrastructure by President Jokowi during his first term in office, right? There is a significant increase in construction contribution to GDP over that period of time. And it's been constantly moving up. Now, before I change current prices, these are current prices, right? So slide 35 shows that it's at current prices. When they compare this with trend over a period of time at current market price, at constant market prices. So this is what Pak Bimo was talking about earlier. Your BPS sometimes produce very confusing results because they sometimes use constant data and sometimes they use current market prices. So you have to be very careful when they show you data in 2010 constant market prices compared to current prices. Okay, questions before I go on to this. Are there any other questions? Are there questions, or have I been very confusing?
Can I ask Mr. TK?
Yes, go ahead, Abdi.
There is a slide when I see there is a difference between GDP and GNP. Is that mean that GNP is considering export-import, or maybe we can call the GNP on approach expenditure, or it's a different one?
It's a different definition. Okay, gross, GDP and GNP. Okay, this is a very good question. I apologize for not explaining this clearly. GDP is all the value add in Indonesia. Okay, in Indonesia. It basically means that it is the value add of every worker working in Indonesia and every company located in Indonesia. Okay, you get that? Now, can you give me the name of a foreign company in Jakarta? For an example, give me a name. Shimizu? Okay, Shimizu is owned by the Japanese. It is a Japanese construction company in Jakarta. So call the company Shimizu Indonesia. All right? Shimizu Indonesia is owned by Japan, but operating in Jakarta. So profit earned by Shimizu Indonesia is calculated here. All right? It is added to GDP. It is not added here. This is gross national product. So it is value add of warga negara Indonesia, Indonesian citizen. Indo citizen and Indo company all over the world. Okay, so if you have Wika, Wijaya Karya, operating in Singapore, Wika in Singapore will add to this gross national product. So it is all to do with your citizens of Indonesia and companies owned by Indonesians. So there is a slight difference between GDP and GNP. So this one, value add in Indonesia, would include profit of Shimizu in Jakarta. Okay, this one will not include profit of Shimizu in Jakarta, but it will include profit of Wika in Singapore, because Wika is an Indonesian-owned company. So can you now tell the difference between GDP and GNP? Is that clear?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you very much. So the product national brutto is there is no connection between import-export.
There is no connection between import and export. Yes, it all depends on how many Indonesian companies go overseas and how many international companies are in Indonesia. But the numbers are very similar. See, you can see that it's not very different, okay? Because you do not have too many companies, foreign companies in Indonesia, and you don't have too many Indonesian companies overseas. But I think other countries like America would have a very different GDP versus GNP, because ownership of the companies are very different.
Hello, Mr. TK.
Yes, Abe.
How about the company itself? It's a joint venture between the local and the international company. Is it included in GDP or GNP?
So it depends. If the company is a joint venture registered in Indonesia, it becomes an Indonesian company. And where does the profit go? So it depends where the profits go. All right? It all depends on where the profits are allocated. So if you have a Shimizu joint venture with Wika, creating like KCIC, your Kereta Cepat,
yes.
Indonesia, China. So that becomes an issue. If the profit is captured in KCIC, it will be captured in Indonesia. But if KCIC then distributes the profit to the Chinese company, then it will be given to the Chinese company, because the profits cannot stay in one company all the time. The parent company will take the profits back to China. Correct? Okay. I need to explain another point. Let me quickly go back to the Microsoft Excel and show you something else. Let me share this again. Value add. Okay, let's come back to this example again, right? You have Australia, Indonesia. Let me just insert a few more lines over here so that Indonesia now goes away. This is an Australian company, and I call this main contractor. Okay, so the main contractor does this for 100 million. Now, there is another option where there is a main contractor and subcontractor. Main contractor, subcontractor, right? Let's call this main con, subcon. Project is still 100, but instead of working on 45 million on materials, they only work on 15 million on materials, and subcontract 30 million. Okay, so then the labor could be 15, 25, electricity 2, fuel 3, 2, profit 4, 2, and if you add them up, it's still the same, right? It should add up to be the same, 100 million. Now, but if you ask the main contractor, what is their contract sum? Contract sum is 100 million. Subcon, what is the contract sum? 61 million, correct? So if you ask main con, call that main con A, subcon B. If you ask main con to report contract, they will say 100 million. If you ask subcon to report contract, it's 61 million. So what if you ask them to report total construction? How much is total construction in Australia for this project or for these two companies? How do you solve this problem? How do you solve this problem? Because if they report 161, then this will not be correct. Correct? Do you see the problem?
Yes.
So we cannot report total construction. We only report value added. So this is why we use value add in national accounts. We cannot use revenue or contract amount or total output, because total output for main contractor is 100 million. Total output for subcontractor B is 61 million. But your value add is correct. Your value add is equal to profit plus labor. So value add has dropped. Value add for this is 27, and if you add them together, it is still 46. Can you see how with a subcontract, you have to only report value add, because value add here is 19. Value add for subcontractor is 26. Total value add is still the same. So those two values must be the same. So 19 plus 27 equals to 46. But you cannot use 100 plus 61, cannot be 161. Do you now understand why we cannot use contract values? Because contract values are wrong. They include multiple levels of subcontracting. So you have to use value add, and you only total up the value add to get GDP. Okay, let me go back to this. Share. Any other questions for now? So we have explained GDP versus GNP. Now, this is a figure that I think Pak Abdul has also described. Less developed countries will have a smaller share of construction GDP. The industrializing countries or rapidly developing countries will have a high share of construction GDP, and I believe Indonesia is up here now. Indonesia is here. And when we become an advanced economy, the importance of construction will naturally drop. We are not in Australia, for example, the greatest sector of growth is now into services. So in financial services, in healthcare, in education. So construction on its own has become less important. So this is something that you guys need to understand. So construction GDP will start from a low percentage, goes up to about 10 to 12% when the country is developing rapidly. They have to invest in infrastructure, invest in roads, railway, like what Indonesia is doing today. And later on, when your other sectors of the economy are growing, then you will see that their percentage of construction GDP will drop to about 6%. I think 6% is quite normal. In America, it has gone down to about 3%. So that is why you see that many of the infrastructure in America is breaking down. Their bridges are poorly maintained, and that's also because they have very small share of investments into infrastructure. This is all information from your construction in Indonesia. So I would suggest that you have a look at some of these information and help me think, or help yourself think about where your value add is, right? Because we have your compensation at 206, is that billion or trillion? I can't remember now. I think that's trillion, 206 trillion rupiah, right? Trillion rupiah. So you can check that, whether that's compensation that is work completed, but then when you actually add them up, you don't quite get to the correct value add. So I think there is some issue with your construction industry data. You also need to understand where your data is for workers, because when you are trying to work out GDP per capita or productivity values like value add per worker, you need to understand and be very accurate how many workers you have in the industry. So you have, I think, based on LPJK data, you have number of experts. So tenaga ahli is 245,000 and tenaga terampil is another 500 over 1,000. But you have a lot of construction workers, right? What you call the daily workers. So if you look at some of the data that you can obtain from your Indonesian construction statistics, you should be able to then work out a lot of all that information. You have some data on your housing development, but mainly it's volume, value, and average price. You have not, or rather the BPS have not been publishing values on approvals and construction activity, as in how many housing developments were started, how many were completed and all that. So that will probably appear in the next few years as your PPS starts collecting all that information, or if Wawan finishes his PhD and recommends a good system for collecting data. Okay, so you have development of rumah siap huni, what you call ready to occupy houses. So all that information is available. Now, so that officially ends my lecture. That's all the information I have on GDP and national accounts. I may take the next couple of slides to explain how we actually work out the growth, okay? So I think it's easier if I show you an example rather than to explain how it works verbally. So let me just share my screen again and very quickly explain this. Now, if I, can you see this? So we have three commodities, okay? Let's look at three commodities, A, B, and C. And in year one, we produce 10 items of A, 15 items of B, 20 items of C. Now, if you are just a small farmer producing pineapples, okay? If you are a farmer producing pineapples, so let's say you are producing apples. What do you call pineapples in Bahasa Indonesia? Nanas.
Nanas.
Nanas or nenas? In Malaysia, we call nenas.
Nanas.
Nenas, okay. So if 1 year you produce 4,000 pineapples, the next year you produce 5,000 pineapples, it's quite easy to work out your growth, right? Growth is equal to 5,000 divided by 4,000, and that is a 25% increase, correct? That is because you are counting absolute value, absolute number of nanas. Now, but if your nanas increases in value, so over here you sell the nanas for say what, 20,000, and then here the nanas increase its price to 30,000. How do you work out growth? How do you work out growth? Is it 25% or is it more? Mm.
50%.
That's a lot more, you see, because if you are counting the profit of if you're counting growth in revenue, okay, growth in revenue, it will be a lot, right? Because your revenue is now equal to this time that, but I got to change that to, yeah. Okay. And then that's a much bigger growth. But this is growth in revenue. And that is equal to this divided by that. It is an 87.5% growth in revenue. But in actual productivity growth, what is your productivity growth? It is only 25%, because the increase in the price of nanas is actually it's an inflation. Okay, it is not an increase in productivity. So we try not to use the value, but you actually use number. Number is more important than value. Okay, so let's go to a real example now of construction. Okay, so if you have 3 commodities in your country, A, B, and C, in year 1, you produce 10, 15, 20. Your price is 8, 12, and 15. Your economy is now $360. The following year, commodity A, B, and C increased from 10 to 15. This one didn't increase. This one increased from 20 to 25. This price dropped. This price increased. This one increased. So the value is P2 multiplied by quantity 2. So that looks as if there is a year-on-year increase of 25%. But is this correct? What do you think? Is this correct? Is this correct? We don't think this is correct, because if you use the new value, you are overestimating. You are actually taking inflation into your calculation. So it should not be P2, but it's possible to use P1. Okay? You use P1 price of year 1, but quantity of year 2. So this one will be, instead of price of year 2, you change that to price of year 1. So it is, can you see this? So it is quantity of year 2 multiplied by price of year 1. This one is quantity of year 2, price of year 1, quantity of year 2, price of year 1. So your growth is only 18.06%. So you have, this is option 1, using year 1 prices. So this is one way of removing the impact of price increase, because this is real productivity, right? So in year 2, your country has actually increased productivity. You have increased production by 18%, but you are using year 1 prices to calculate the actual increase. There is another option, which is to use year 2 prices. So you can then change your comparison. So now you are in year 2. It is possible now, instead of using P1 Q1, you use P2 Q1 as a comparison. All right. So you change your comparison. Instead of quantity 1 multiplied by price 1, you compare that with price 2. Use year 2 prices, and your, instead of 360 now for year 1, you are now looking at year 2. So you're comparing year 2 prices, 450, which is from here. So this is the same. This one was using year 1. This one changes the year 1 value by, instead of using P1 prices, you take this, multiply by year 2 prices to give you year 1 value. So the increase here is 15%. So in Australia, we tend to use this method of calculating our growth of, when we compare year-to-year comparisons, we tend to use either this or that. I am not sure how you do it in Australia, because it's in Indonesia. But what I'm trying to show you is how we do it in Australia, right? So there are 2 options. One is to use year 1 prices. Another option is to use year 2 prices. Any questions at this stage?
I think
yes, Pak Wawan.
I think this is very interesting to, for me, it's very, very, very new, yeah, to calculate growth by using the current prices in years 2, or the option 2 use the, but in practically in construction, how to get prices, because the unit is very unique. One project for another project, there are no same projects, so the value is very different. For example, it means for this is very, very simple simple example for community, but for construction, because one unit project or one project is different for another project, so we cannot use. Maybe we have two same project in first years, Tower E, and the second, and the same project in, and construction start from years 2, but we cannot use the same value in the same period.
I understand your problem. Yes. I don't have an answer, but I think BPS is also trying to solve this problem. If you look at the BPS data, there is some information now. So this is table 27, indeks harga perdagangan besar bahan bangunan konstruksi. So they have harga perdagangan besar bahan bangunan konstruksi. So they have an index which they have computed, which I believe is equal to 100 in the year 2010. So if you look down here, tahun dasar is 2010. Can you see it, or do you want me to zoom in? At the bottom here, tahun dasar 2010 equals to 100. So they have computed for building materials for all the years from 2010 to 2018, 2019. So these are for the residential projects, public works, for roads, bridges, construction of electricity, gas, drinking water, and communication. So all these values are available, but I am not very sure how to use them or the quality of these indices. So they are trying to collect all that information. So you have index kemahalan konstruksi as well, where the 100 is, they don't say what 100 is, right? Is 100 Jakarta? No.
This is
Index
compared with another city, I think.
Yeah, they're comparing city against city, but which city is 100?
Semarang.
Semarang. Is it?
Yes, Semarang.
Okay, so they are trying to compare all this. So it's possible to find some of these data, but you can always check with us on how we collect, or check with the developed country on how they collect material price index and also labor wage index or labor cost index, because we need to also look at the wages and how the wages have increased over time. Okay.
Because actually BPS they did to collect the data by survey. So if the survey the respondents come from contractor will always use the current contract, yes, not the contract. So how to use the real value if this is my question, Pak.
We can compute a more general index for the construction industry. So I am involved with the World Bank group. So there are construction academics. I think you have seen the book, right? But Abdul has bought the book on construction, measuring the construction industry. So some of those books will give you the information on how we compare construction output across different countries and how the World Bank compute the index based on a basket of materials, building materials. Because again, different countries use different materials. We use a lot of concrete and we use a lot of timber. So our index is based on on the construction materials that we use. But you cannot use our index because you use different materials. So can you see the problem here? Any other questions? I don't think I've answered Pak Wawan's question properly, but I think we can have a separate discussion on this topic.
That's why my hypothesis is we can solve this problem if we have source data come from the manufacturer.
Mm-hmm.
We collect the data from manufacturer, not from contractor.
Yes, you can.
Because if we collect the data from contractor, they always use the value that's, I think they put like lip service to make their project is more profitable. Something. Right.
Yes, I agree with you there.
I think like that.
No, what you need to do is speak to the quantity surveyors, because the quantity surveyors have a standard system of collecting material prices and construction prices. Okay, you need to talk to the quantity surveyors in your country. I understand that quantity surveyors is not considered a profession yet. They are trying to organize. They have an Ikatan quantity surveyor Indonesia, which they are trying to organize. I think Pak Abdul may know some of them. I have met their representatives in Jakarta during my previous visit. So I think it's useful for you to speak to them, because they may have a database of basic construction materials from the manufacturer. So that is what we call the basic price and producer prices and purchaser price. So you can get different prices either from a basic price, producer price, or purchaser price from your Ikatan quantity surveying.
Okay, Pak.
Any other questions? Can you guys tell me if you have found this topic useful? Because when I go deeper into national accounts, it gets a lot more challenging. I understand that most of you come from a civil engineering background, so the mathematics should not be a problem for you, but it will require some form of mathematical analysis, especially matrix manipulation, in maybe week 4. Okay, so if you can't remember your matrix manipulation, please revise how to do matrices, how to multiply matrix, what is an identity matrix, and matrix inversion. All right, any other questions? Pak Budi?
Yes, sir.
Any questions from you, from the class? The class is very quiet.
Ya, dari Bapak, Ibu, dan rekan-rekan lainnya.
Can I ask, sir?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. There is, you mentioned 3 different way to approach to measure the GDP.
Mm-hmm.
In Australia, I saw in the slide the 3 approaches is used to the statistic document. So in these 3 approach, there is a different output, or there's is that the same output when we calculate
the
that?
output must be exactly the same. It's just like accounting. Your balance sheet must balance. So it's the same with your own earnings, right? If you earn a certain amount of money every year, your income must be equal to your expenses and savings, or equal to your expenses and borrowing. So both sides must balance. You cannot have your accounting system which does not balance. So input must be equal to output.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Tiki.
If you are looking for Australian data, I suggest that you just get on to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, and we have a lot of information available online. I also want to share very quickly a report with you. This is produced by IBIS World. So they produce industry reports for different sectors of the industry. So this is a very broad sector, just construction in Australia. And if you have a look at this, you can see that this is a December 2020 report. And they give us a very detailed description of how the industry operates, what are the key external drivers, the supply chain, key statistics for the industry, the growth, the profit margin, how many businesses, how many workers, what are the wages, what are the key external drivers, the major players, CIBE group, then industry performance. So it gives the reader a very good overview of how the industry operates from an economics perspective. If you guys are interested, I can send a copy over to Pak Budi for him to share with you. But you got to promise me that you will not share this outside of your class. This is a copyrighted document, and I'm not allowed to share it with anyone else. But I think it's fine to share with students, provided the students do not share it with other people outside of the university, okay? So we have a lot of information that we can find on all these databases: international trade, business locations, competitive analysis of the market, cost structure, whether the profits are going up, coming down, whether the wages are coming down, your inputs are going up, rent, competition, barriers to entry, globalization, market share of the major players. Our largest contractor in the infrastructure sector only has 2.6% of market share. So it is a very fragmented market. And we also have lots of statistics on number of workers, number of companies. So if you want this, I can share that with you. Any other questions? What else do you want from me? Because I can get hold of a lot of very interesting information.
Can I ask again, sir?
Yes.
Continuing my question last week about the how to measuring the productivity in construction level. From this data, how we can calculate the productivity of construction in industry level? Thank you.
Okay, at the industry level, the most common measure is value add per worker. So you take industry value add divided by number of workers.
How you define the worker? The worker is the, I mean, maybe like we talked earlier, pegawai tetap or the buruh.
Yeah. I see the problem in Indonesia. In Australia, we do not have that problem because all our workers are pekerja tetap. We do not have daily workers. So all our workers are either tenaga ahli or tenaga terampil.
Okay, so there is just one definition in Australia about the workers.
Yes.
Okay.
So for Indonesia, you may want to have two measures. One is value added divided by tenaga tetap, and another one will be value added divided by hours of work by the pekerja harian. Because the pekerja harian, when they are not working in the industry, they should not be counted. So BPS collects data on how many hours they work. So you take the value add divided by how many hours they work. So that is the better measure of productivity.
Okay, thank you very much, sir.
D. Okay, I can ask Pak Budi to send you some of the research papers that I have written on construction productivity. Now, when I started off with the lecture, I said that construction is defined as the contractor working on a construction site, which is correct for Australia. And any work that is taken from the construction site and moved to a prefabrication factory is considered manufacturing. All right. So what I'm saying is that productivity, every change to construction to make it more productive will increase productivity in manufacturing and not increase productivity in construction, because construction is defined as work on the construction site. So our productivity does not change. And all the improvements in productivity is captured in manufacturing. So the data will always show that construction is not productive. Does that answer your question? Or does that help answer your question?
Yes, yes. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. So that's a huge problem with the construction industry. The problem comes from definition, not because the construction industry is not productive. Okay, any other questions? How many students? Okay, how many students do we have in the construction economics class?
5 in total, sir.
Only 5. Okay. What about the 5 of them? Are there questions from the 5 students first? No? Any questions? Any other questions? Okay, if there are no questions, then maybe we should end here. Pak Budi?
Yes. Untuk peserta kuliah, tidak ada pertanyaan? Atau ada hal yang mau didiskusikan? Kalau tidak ada, mungkin kita akan lanjutkan minggu depan ya, dengan topik struktur industri konstruksi. Sama mediumnya dengan Zoom ya, untuk minggu depan pada jam yang sama. Ya, terima kasih kita ucapkan kepada Pak Tike yang sudah sharing beberapa hal terkait dengan ekonomi konstruksi dan ekonomi nasional, dan bagaimana kita melihat konstruksi berkontribusi atas ekonomi secara nasional. Ya. Mungkin kalau tidak ada pertanyaan, sesi ini bisa kita akhiri. Oke, sir, I think we can conclude the session for this.
Okay.
Kita bisa dapat slide-nya nggak?
Slide, yes. I will send the slides to Pak Budi.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. And the Excel spreadsheet and all the documents that I have referred to.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Tike.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Tike.
Thank you.
Ya, makasih Pak Budi.
Terima kasih Bu, terima kasih Pak.
Kita bisa live ya, Pak Budi.